Well, but then it's also the balance of if you didn't have to pay to get in, you can spend more on things.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff to buy here. Smart cheese.
Is there anything that you want to know before we delve into our heavier topic? Since you have no.
All right. That kind of thing.
Admittedly, I don't read a lot of comics throughout the year. I tend to buy them a couple times a year. I was telling the story earlier that my store in New York is the Town Comics, and so I go once or twice a year with a certain amount of money. And for me, it's like a test thing. I'm like, okay, I've got $60. What do I buy? Based on nothing but what's on the racks. And I'm always really, so for me, I end up reading this weird smattering of stuff that is both familiar, or the cover was interesting, or a friend of mine worked on it. So it's all weird stuff. But I tend to typically, I don't read comics for pleasure. It's business. I tend to read a lot of nonfiction. So the two books I read last year were both on the science of energy and cruelty.
I also don't read a ton of comics because I don't have time, or I have a big stack by my head of things, and I've been working my way through a couple of things. The last thing I read that I really loved was The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Yang, which is a fantastic book about a boy who is a prince who wants to wear pretty dresses and go out to like dance and stuff. And so secretly hires this dressmaker to come and make him these beautiful dresses. And it's beautifully drawn. I'm a big fan of Nagata Kabi, who wrote My Lesbian Experience of Loneliness, which is a great book. And I'm reading the sequel right now. It's called My Solo Exchange Diary.
Do you guys know what that stuff is?
So I tend to read things that are a little more upbeat. I really love things that are very queer. That tends to be my jam. I haven't read a lot of superhero comics in a really long time.
I track, so because I draw comics, I tend to track comics. That's a big selling. So I have always had a really difficult time reading a comic if I don't make the art. And I know for some people it's the reverse. They can stomach bad art if they enjoy the words of the reading. For me, it's the
Who's about that book die? That art is phenomenal.
Stephanie
Oh,
Hans.
Stephanie Hans. Yeah.
So good.
She's great.
She's over there somewhere downtown.
Did you introduce yourself?
Oh, that's a good idea. I'll just like know who we are.
This is a pre-show.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're gonna do that as soon as our next guest comes, and then yeah.
We haven't actually started yet.
Stalk you and follow you. We're just waiting for the next guest, so we're just trying to entertain you without actually tap dancing.
But
And you juggle?
I can do a one-handed cartwheel, but I'm not going to. I went to gymnastics.
oh wow, I didn't know that. We're learning things already.
Right.
The panel wasn't even started.
So maybe I can start to ask you all questions. So what are you all reading? What are you all interested in reading lately? What's fascinating you?
Come on.
Comics.
Everyone's here for that.
Fiction, comics.
Yeah,
What are
it
you all
doesn't have to be
reading?
comics. Is there something that a book you've been reading, a comic you've been devouring, even, I mean, just to open it up, a podcast you've been listening to that's like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah, my favorite murder. My favorite murder.
Anyone?
My hero.
Other thoughts?
Anything Jason Aaron's doing? Because he
Is
got,
that
yeah,
Yeah.
just
And
Jason Aaron.
So what is it about his voice that you like so much?
You could tell he wants to write Conan with a couple of characters he does, and so seeing him getting to do Conan was great.
I mean,
So anything he does, I dig. and it's kind of neat to see him get that because I think I was following him on Twitter when he first got the job, and he posted all his Conan books. He goes, I just got a little research to do. But you could tell they were all like dog-eared and read multiple times.
I love it. Do you find, and without necessarily needing to identify, that there are certain authors you notice like speak directly to you?
I think I can answer that too. My friend Eve Ewing, who I'm bringing here for my event on May 9th. I'll tell you all about that soon. But she's a professor at the University of Chicago, sociology professor. But she's also a poet, and she's also a nonfiction writer. But she's now writing Ironheart, which is Riri Williams about a black girl in Chicago. I'm from Chicago, so her obviously writing speaks to me because she has little nuances about our city that a person who wasn't from Chicago couldn't get at all. So.
She's a great Twitter follow too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. 100%.
Growing up, it was the author S.E. Hinton. She's what made me want to write fiction and poetry. But now, like in the comic book world, now it's been Agent of Asgard, Al Ewing, because just the way he's reinvented Loki as a sort of anti-hero who wants to do good. That's something that I relate to a lot.
Can we talk about how S.E. Hinton was 16 when she wrote
Yeah.
Outsiders? 16!
She wrote for Outsiders?
Yeah.
We brought her here like 3 years ago to talk about the Outsiders, and she's still an awesome person to talk to.
That's awesome.
All right, we're almost
Hello, everybody. This is T. Franklin of Bingo Love and Juke Joy. And we have our fully formed panel.
Yay.
It's okay.
So we can get started. My name is Jerry Hawkins. I'm the director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. It's an initiative of the Kellogg Foundation. 14 cities were chosen in 2017 to go through this process, and we're one of the 14 cities. After the July 7th, 2016 police shooting, to really have our city reckon with the truth. When we talk about race, talk about gender, a lot of systems of oppression, so we can really break that down and create this radically inclusive city that we want. Dallas, that's one for everybody. And so I'm excited to have this great panel, diversity in comics conversation, but it's really gonna be much broader than that and much more focused than that. So thank you all for having it. First, let's give a round of applause to our guests. So I want them to introduce themselves. Obviously, I'm very excited. Read their comics and seen the art of their comics. I'm an artist myself, so I'm excited to have you all here. So please introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your work. My gender pronouns are he, him, and his. You can start with those, and then we'll go through there. All right? Sounds good?
Sure.
All right.
My name's Phil Jimenez. I've been writing and drawing comics for about 28 years, mostly for DC Comics. I work pretty exclusively in the superhero world. I'm best known for my work on Wonder Woman and X-Men. And, my pronouns are he and him, his, forgive the list. And I do a lot of these panels, and I'm always really interested in what you all have to say as much as what we have to say. So.
All right, thank you.
I'm Lilah Sturges, she, her, hers. I have been writing comics since 2006. My first comic was the Jack of Fables, and most recently I've done the Lumberjanes, the Infernal Compass, which was nominated for a GLAAD Media Award this year. I'm also a trans woman. I came out as trans a little over 2 years ago, and so that's been an interesting journey for me, having navigated the comic book industry, like presenting as male and now as female. And that's given me a lot of insight into the industry and how it treats people perceived as male, people perceived as female.
All right, thank you.
I'm T. Franklin. I'm the writer of Bingo Love. I'm queer, black, disabled, she, her. Thanks for reading.
All right, so let's kick off our discussion. When I was younger, coming into a comic shop, I was always looking for myself. It was very hard to find myself, but I would look hard, you know? Even at some of these secondary and tertiary characters, I couldn't find myself. So let's talk about representation. How important is representation when you see yourself, whether it be your race, your identity, who you are, in comics? How important is that to you all?
So I have an interesting relationship with representation because for all of my life, especially when I was very young, there was so little trans representation as to not to exist. And the trans imagery that you saw in media was all profoundly negative. And so as I grew up, that wasn't something that I could identify with. That wasn't something that I wanted to find in myself.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't, if I'd seen a trans person in a comic book, I would have run away because that wasn't something I wanted to identify with. And it wasn't until Lana Wachowski, the filmmaker, came out and I saw her as, this is someone who I can actually relate to, someone who I admire. And then it was like, oh, crap, that's me. Like now I get it, like this all makes sense now. But until then, I couldn't even do it. So having positive representation when I was young would have made so much difference. Like I could have figured my stuff out so much earlier.
Well, y'all know superheroes, DC, Marvel is white. It's white. It's white. Paper, white. You know, white on white. Everything, right? As a woman, you know, or as a little girl, you see Wonder Woman and everybody else, their tits are like here, right? Their thighs are like, and they got these ass. They really never had a big ass.
Not really.
No. They never had a big ass.
It was
It's just, you know, and they're fighting in these bathing suits while the men are covered from head to toe. And it's like, well, she gets stabbed in a midsection not covered, you know. But it was always definitely directed to the male gaze. So that alone, as a young girl growing up, you're like, okay, but I don't look like that. And then it's like, well, damn, nobody has my color. So now what? And that's, you know, you can find yourself in certain characters, you know, like I would find myself in Miss Marvel back in the, telling my age, but like in the 80s, remember she was kidnapped and then raped and had to have this kid and whatnot. I was going through something extremely similar and that's what I could relate to, but she still wasn't black, so it wasn't really, you know, there. And as I got older, I stopped reading comics with kids and I had to choose or feed my kids or do I buy comics, and I decided to be a mom, so I could no longer buy the comics. And when I finally got back into it, there still was no representation. And I was a comics, I used to interview folks like them. I would review their comics, and it just got to a point that it was like, yo, there's nobody that looks like me or my kids. Either on the cover or the characters. And I just got to the point, Marvel, DC, everybody, all the publishers are giving me their books to review. And I just got to the point that I was like, I'm not reviewing it if it's not by a person of color. Because I felt like that was my job, that was something that I had to do. I can't just keep on promoting books that don't look like my family. Because we want to see ourselves. I want my kids to be able to see a name on a cover that looks like them. And I said it my damn self, you know? Say you want eventually did. And even with the disability, there's not disability representation, not just in comics, but also on TV and in movies. You got able-bodied folks playing people who are disabled, and it's like, why are you telling us that we can't act? So that's a whole nother conversation, but yeah, representation is obviously important, you know, it's my life, you know, it's not diversity, that diversity word is such a bullshit buzzword, period, cause I'm not a buzzword, this is myself, this is my body, this is me, this is a lot of y'all that's in here, we're not a diversity, we're people, I curse a lot, so. My God.
Thank you. Phil?
So I have various feelings on representation. I'll sort of narrow the scope to genre fiction and comics. Clearly, as a white presenting guy, like I've never ever been at a loss for seeing quote unquote myself in a comic, at least physically represented. And so, as an issue, that's never been one for me. What I'm fascinated by is, I think this has a lot to do with age, is specificity of queer representation. So I was reared in a time where gay and queer representation was often in subtext and or aesthetic. So I often say the Wonder Woman TV show, for example, which had no gay characters, but was clearly like influenced by a gay aesthetic, or 80s nighttime soaps, like Dynasty was so written by a bunch of gay guys doing cocaine in the writer's room. Like, it's so clear to me that the sensibility and the aesthetic is so gay, and I don't even mean explicitly homosexual. I mean, like it's a queering of the word of the world. And so, in recent years, what I've been really fascinated by, and just is the conversation I've been having with younger people about desperately wanting to see themselves physically represented in the fiction, as well as metaphorically, aesthetically, textually, subtextually. And so part of me sees it as my mission to help make that happen. The other thing though is I got into a really interesting argument with a friend of mine, a young gay guy, and I was talking about how Thor Ragnarok is like a totally gay movie. And he's like, but there are no gay people in it. And it became a very interesting thing about semantics and language and what we mean by that. Like for me, I was reared at a time where Thor would have been my, like, because it just feels so queer. And I tend to use that word in a really broad way. Not necessarily about sexual orientation, but about a queering of a worldview. So anti-patriarchal, anti-tradition, etc. But I have many queer friends who use it and say like you can't use that word, or that word is inapplicable if there's not explicitly homosexual representation. Blah, 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 blah. The thing I have decided that I'm really interested in is making sure that people can see themselves the way I always have, but I'm also personally interested in this idea that representation can come from aesthetic as much as specificity of like, that is me because I look exactly like that. But again, I say that as someone who's never had to worry about that, so I'm lucky.
So that's really interesting because we were having this conversation when we started, but you know, the comics industry, as we know, it started off as a white male, cisgendered, Jewish representation of characters who were very heroic, very patriarchal in that sentence, right? I mean, it's really kind of a representation of the American ethos at that time. And now you all are here, right? Can you all share a little bit about your thoughts on how we have come to this place where you all are now, like, producing art and people are really interested in your art, but we still have a lot to go. So from here to here, share a little bit about how we got to this moment and how we are still trying to move forward.
I think social media has a lot to do with that because people are so
Yeah, I found out about you on social media.
When you have now access to everybody. You have access to your favorite celebs. You have access to, you know, shops, food joints, behind you saying this is some bullshit, like that Burger King shit, like the piss, because it's a Happy Meal, you want a pissed meal or an angry meal, and people were like, you're talking about mental health, but what about your workers? Are they getting mental health stuff? And next thing you know, it's like, oh shit, okay, my bad, you know? Same thing with Sonic. People were like, you're saying Sonic the Hedgehog, and what happened? It got changed, you know? So people are, you get enough people behind you, people will see it. Not all the time it'll change, or it'll slowly, you know, change, but social media definitely had a major help in getting things just changed slightly. You know, you have, for Bingo Love, it's about queer grandma, Black queer grandma. No way in the world would I have ever thought that I would be here speaking all across the damn country to talk about Black queer grandmas, right? Like, you have Aunt May, Uncle Ben, Mom, Pa Ken, Magneto, and etc. That's it as far as senior citizens, grandfolks, like I said. And here I come with Mari and Hazel, and it's like, give it to me, I want it all. And it's a beautiful thing, having people just feel recognized. They're being seen as Black women, as queer women, as, you know, there's disabled characters in the book. Like, that is extremely important. And if it wasn't for social media and Kickstarter, if I would have brought this idea to Image or to Dark Horse, they probably would have turned it down, because they wouldn't have taken a chance on a book about grandmas. It's not gonna sell. That's what I thought. I literally thought like that last week of the Kickstarter, I would be begging people, please donate, please. But it got funded in 5 days. And that's because it was something that was missing, and these people wanted it. They craved it so much. Like Black Panther. People wanted to see a Black superhero. They got tired of the Chris's. We want somebody else. And they showed up and showed out for that. Same thing with Captain Marvel. Again, we're tired of the Chris's. Now we've got a woman, and they showed up. If you're saying this is a fluke, for whatever it is, Bingo Love was called a fluke, nobody's gonna buy it. It sold out 3 times within 3 months. They want it. If you put it out, like if you build it, they will come. Right? If you put these books out there, people are going to go for it, and they're gonna throw their money at it, especially if it's done by marginalized people. Because if you constantly have white folks behind everything, if they're like me, we don't give a fuck. Because we're tired of white people doing everything. But you're telling us we are not talented enough to do it. And that's just, and we know better. We know better. We know that we can do these things. But if nobody wants to give us a chance, what are you gonna do? Well, when you go on social media and you put your project out there and motherfuckers see it, they gonna throw their money at it, and they gonna tell a friend and tell a friend and tell a friend. And then next thing you know, somebody's gonna knock on your door and say, hey, I would like to have this.
That's great.
That's a good answer.
That's a great answer.
I'm a terrible example for this question because I grew up, you know, being perceived as a straight cis white man, and so, you know, when I wanted to get into comics, you know, comics was like, yeah, sure, you know, come on, you're one of us, just do it. So, I mean, then it was really kind of a thrill to later be like, psych, I'm a queer woman. I'm already here and you can't get rid of me. So that was pretty cool. But you know, what I've noticed is that the internet has done some really great things for comics, in that, you know, my experience is more with queer content, and just seeing that, like, the amount of queer content that has been out there on the internet for years, like on Tumblr and webcomics and stuff like that. It's always been there, and it's been people who have just been putting it out themselves without the power power of a publisher without the marketing, without any of that stuff. And people are desperate, you know, like you were saying, like people are desperate for that content. They really want it. And so, you know, when I come out now and I'm like, I'm writing this book and it's super queer, people are like, yes, tell me more, you know? And that's the reaction that I want. Those are the books that I want to create, and I want to find that audience and give them the books that they have been waiting for forever. Yeah.
This might veer a little bit, but we were talking earlier about one of the things I did. So my world is exclusively Marvel, DC superheroes, and so my questions about representation through those companies are always two. One is, those are universes designed very specifically to exclude us, and so I am fascinated by the ways in which they try to incorporate this, sometimes through like in really horrible token ways, sometimes really well-intended ways, sometimes very successful ways, right? But the kind of these universes are sort of jarred. And I argue that superheroes are an inherently queer concept, straddled by a lot of sort of conservative ideology, which is a very interesting thing, which goes to the second point. And one thing I'm thinking a lot about representation in superhero comics, particularly with people of color, queer people, even women, is if you have representation, visual representation of one of those communities, but they do nothing in those universes to affect problems reflected. So for example, forgive the kind of stereotyping, but if black characters are doing nothing to tackle the prison industrial complex in those universes, and if all they are doing is actually enforcing laws in the way sort of conservative white people would have in the 50s, what does that representation actually mean? So the representation is there, it's visual, we see ourselves, but there's still buttressing a system that never wanted us there in the first place. If queer, like, one of the things I'm really fascinated by is X-Men as a queer metaphor, et cetera, and it can work in a number of different ways, but if, my friend, an academic, Ramsey Fawaz, wrote this really interesting thing about how the X-Men for a very long time had a very clear metaphoric message, and then around Fall of the Mutants, there were these annual events where we kept seeing the population literally wiped out, risen for the grave, gay people, queer people were paying to watch themselves being wiped out over and over and over again by straight creators, right? And like, what does that mean psychologically? Why is that enticing? What is, like, what purpose does that serve? So the queer people in that universe were being wiped out and replaced, and their numbers shrunk, and all that, as opposed to doing things in that universe to actively transform it. And so I find that as a queer creator in comics, and particularly superhero comics, I pulled back quite a bit because I've started to second guess for the first time, like, if it's just enough to have someone, a character represent, or do they have to actively change the world that they're in to matter? I don't know what the answer to that is, but in a superhero perspective, that's what I think about a lot.
That's interesting. That really makes me think. Like the idea that, like, if you had a trans woman superhero, like the idea that she would be propping up the prison, like, would just be totally absurd. Like, no trans woman would do that. Like,
I don't think a lot, right, but I think a lot, in those universes, like, punitive justice is a real, like, one of the things I'm super fascinated by superhero universes is that people are defined by one bad moment in their life, right? So all those criminals that Batman is beating up, like, who knows where they would have been 10 years from now or even a year before. They're in that moment and they are paralyzed, hospitalized, slaughtered, because that's how we see criminality, and that's how we think about, like, and so I'm really the punitive nature of justice in superhero comics really fascinates me, particularly as it pertains to how queer characters and female characters and PSC characters reinforce those ideas of justice and the law. How about that?
Oh, that's great. Now we need to do a podcast on just that, right? But I want to go back to something you said, Lilah, particularly because my kids are here. Those are two of my kids right there.
Did we just embarrass you?
They're used to me bringing them up because comics is a big part of their life. My son, Jali, I taught him how to read the comics. He was slow to read, but he's an awesome student now. And Asha is like, she loves graphic novels. That's what she wants to read. She wants to read graphic novels like these contain whole stories. She doesn't really want to read the one story out of the arc. She wants to read the whole arc, right? But it's still introducing some of these the topics of being a person that is trans, or a person that is queer, or a person that is disabled, and a black woman. These are concepts that we wouldn't have seen 10 years, 5 years maybe earlier, but we're seeing them now. How important is it for kids to see this earlier? And also thinking of the comic industry as also a very adult genre, but when I was younger, it was for us, like it was for, I was going to the comic book store, spending my little allowance or my little money I hustled up on comic books. So this notion of it being a genre for youth or a genre for adults, how do you all wrestle with that, especially when introducing these concepts that we're talking about?
I'm going to dive in just real quick. Comics is not a genre, it's a medium.
That's right.
And there are genres within the medium.
Thank you.
I knew you couldn't let that go.
I actually heard you say that before.
But it matters. The other thing I was going to say is, and I just think it's so we define terms, I think that just because something is labeled adult doesn't make it mature, and I think being explicit doesn't necessarily make it adult, right?
Good. That's good.
So one of the things I find really fascinating are the terms, because and again, I'm speaking only from superhero land over here, but what they think of, and when I say they, I tend to mean publishers, high up people, what they think of as adult and mature is often incredibly childish. It's that stuff that boys who are about 14 think is like adult and mature. It's not dealing with maturity. It's not engaging in things like at a level here. It just usually means more gore.
That's right.
Or like, oh, like there's, you can see the sex. And to them, that literally means like that makes it adult.
That's right.
And it almost feels like the opposite. So
no, that's good. That's good.
When I did Bingo Love, I tried to, the first edition of Bingo Love, there was no sex. It was implied, right? The most, I mentioned a battery operated boyfriend, and then there was like a scene with the tub and the word splish splash. They was got in a tub together, but it was labeled adult, and I was like, this isn't adult. But because it was gay, it was queer women, it got slapped with the title of adult. And I purposely made it all ages. I didn't want to use big words because I wanted it to be in a library for kids. When I was growing up, everything for me, I was going to hell. TV, movies, whatever. Reading books, I was going to hell. And the library was my safe place where I could read whatever I wanted to read. And I purposely wrote that book the way that I did so that the kids can read it. And it wasn't just for adults. I wanted it to be all ages, but as soon as it was queer women in there, they slapped an adult title. And I was like, damn, y'all can't even give me a young adult title?
That's amazing.
And I was like, that sucks, right? But then we have Juke Joint where I'm killing people and the men is just having balls ripped off and shoved in their mouth. That was like really mature. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's adult, that's fine. But fine. Let Bingo Love be the way that it is, and it sucks because of that. Like y'all just slapped the title. But I've got 7-year-olds walking around reading an adult book. It shouldn't. I don't know that thing with the publishers. That part I don't understand. It's a shame because now it's got this title on it. Librarians are gonna look over it. Because they think it might be too adult for the kids to read. And now it's going to be in a different section of the library where the kids might not even know. Just because of who's on the cover.
So I write a book called Lumberjanes, which is a story about 5 girls who are at a camp for girls.
You read that, haven't you?
Oh yeah. She's like, oh yeah.
And one of my absolute favorite things about Lumberjanes is that it's very queer. Not just in the sense that it has a queer aesthetic, but there are queer people in the book.
Right.
And like in the graphic novel I just wrote, The Infernal Compass, this is a book that is intended for 9 and up. there are two girls sharing a sweet, innocent kiss in this book, and the publisher stands behind that. They're like, this is for kids because this is who these kids are. And there is a trans girl in the camp, and it's made explicit that she's a trans girl, and in a very clever way too. When I have a very good friend named Jackie Ball, and the way we became friends was I was on a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, and someone asked me, you know, why do you love Lumberjanes so much? And I started thinking about why I loved it so much, and I realized that if I had read that book when I was 10 and seen not just a trans girl, but a trans girl who was loved and accepted by her peers and who was seen as a full person, that would have changed my life. And I started sobbing. And like, there's this room full of people, maybe twice as many people as are here right now, and everyone's like kind of getting uncomfortable because I'm like sobbing. And Jackie turns to me and she goes, Lilah, do you need a hug? And I said, yes. And then we went out and had drinks afterward, and we've been friends ever since.
It's true. If we have, like, I love my kids, 25, 18, and 16. But if Bingo Love was in the library where I saw it, my kids would not be here. They really wouldn't. Because I would know that it's okay for me to be queer. It's okay for me to like the girl, see Amara who's sitting in front of me. It might not have been okay for me to sniff her hair. I was always right? I know I didn't know then you shouldn't be sniffing girls' hair, but damn, I was a sniffer back then, right? Because I liked her. But I would have been okay, right? The book is saying that it's okay for girls to like girls, and there's no problem with that. My kids wouldn't be here. And I'm hoping that books like Lumberjane and Bingo Love and all these other books that these kids, I'm actually jealous of y'all. These kids, I'm jealous of the kids because they have all these amazing books and media that we've never had. That it just wasn't allowed in our time. And if we had it, our lives would be so much different and better. Just the trauma alone on stuff wouldn't be, I know for me, certain traumas just wouldn't have happened because I would love myself more than I did that as a kid. I didn't love Young T because Young T couldn't love herself or love anybody who was like her. I only started to love myself when I started getting older. And there's a lot of things that I would have changed differently if a book like that existed, or Lumberjanes, or any of these books out here. Things would be so much different. So these kids, y'all have it good, and y'all don't even realize it. You are able to be more open than I know I could have ever been, even with just our parents, you know? I mean, I know there are still kids who can't even carry Bingo Love around, and I'm like, yo, just go to the library. That's your safe place, you know? Your parents will let you go to the library because you're doing work. You know, I'm reading whatever I want to read or watching TV, you know, the videos. Yeah. But they have it so good. We never had it, and you know, the jealousy is there.
That's so real. I mean, I think about, you know, when you see something in a book, like it shows you possibilities, right? It shows you that, like, this is a reality. And you know, for me, I grew up thinking that I was broken, that I was bad, that I was a pervert, that I was damaged beyond repair. And that, believing that about yourself your whole life, it warps you. You know, like, you don't come out of that unscathed. And so having those kinds of experiences, having access to that kind of material, I think is like, it's harm reduction. It's not even just like a happy, good feeling. It's like, you're keeping people from getting hurt. You're keeping people from killing themselves.
Yep.
You know, that's how critical it is.
It is. One of my first, I speak all over, but one of the first ones I spoke at was a library in Jersey. I'm from Jersey. And this little girl waited, she was 10 years old, she waited till after everybody left. And she said, I need to get a copy of Bingo Love to my girlfriend because she's sick in the hospital. I'm like, oh, you know, I hope she feels better. She's like, no, you don't understand. She tried to kill herself when she came out to her parents. A 10-year-old girl. Like, and of course, I couldn't react the way I wanted to react, but inside I was crying and I wanted to find these parents and I wanted to beat ass, right? Because you can't accept your kid for being gay, for liking girls. She went to the extreme to kill herself. Like, that just destroyed me. And she's like, if I can just give her this book, I can give her hope. This is a 10-year-old girl. Hope. For just because of a book shows that it's okay for you to like girls. All we want, you know, we want love from our parents. We just want to be accepted. And if you're not accepted, like Lilah said, that's a lot of this, that's the self-hate and anger and stuff that things would just be so different if we had that love. We wouldn't be so angry towards ourselves, you know? We wouldn't be harming ourselves and doing these things. And it's sorry, I got you.
No, you're good.
Oh, no, it's good. I approach this from a more privileged angle. Clearly in that representation, visual representation was never really an issue. But I've made this joke, you've been on panels and I've made this joke before, but it's really true that the thing that was, so I started reading the Uncanny X-Men in the early 80s, and what struck me about it was that while many of my queer friends read that as metaphor for difference, right? And it was a collection of misfits and different people who got together. What I couldn't get over as a 11 or 12-year-old was how fabulous they were. And my joke is, but there's something truth to it, and there's a reason I bring it up, was I was like, if I can go live in a mansion in upstate New York and wear like leather high heels and like go into outer space and like have big white hair and like trot down the streets of New York, then maybe being different is not so bad. And what's like, maybe like that's an amazing way to live. And so what struck me was that I took those characters in and their differences, and I think this remains true, whereas most fiction writers try to find what unites us. What interests me about humans is how we are different, but not because I want to separate us, because I think that's what makes us extraordinary, is that we're all like these amazingly same, you know, 1,000 times different, like sort of whatever. So if somebody wants to look one way and someone wants to behave another, God bless all of you, right? Like it just doesn't occur to me generally, unless harm is being, you know, heaped on someone, to care. And I really feel like part of that was reading the X-Men. So I'm like, oh. But I guess the other thing is one of the reasons, and I think I am rare in this, that I'm drawn to fantastical fiction, particularly superhero comics, is because of the bigness, the scale, which to me is such an escape, quite frankly, I would say, from straight mundanity. Like, right, the world that we have created, and when I say the world we've created, that's not true, it's not every place, but I feel like what we defy in our identities, the world, is kind of a mundane one at the end of the day. And that's not to condemn anyone who's in it. But the worlds that I sort of paddle in, these comic book worlds, or the Star Warses, or whatever, they show us, I think, the potential of the fantastic. And to me, like what's amazing about queer people is that they're fantastic. The thing I loved about Black Panther was the fantastical nature of that world. To be like, listen, you move like white mundanity out of the way, that's what you get, right? Like, and so I feel like I know a lot, like one of my dearest friends in the Love is Love book, he's my co-star in our little one page. He really got so much out of the X-Men because he was the only Asian kid growing up in Buffalo, New York, and he was gay, and it was just like, there was so much heaped on him, and so he really connected to that X-Men's difference, and I just always connected to their fabulousness. I think the thing I say is it inspired me to look bigger, and I will always be grateful to them for that.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
So sort of like be out and be queer because it's great, right? Like as opposed to be afraid and be worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why those like annual like death of the mutants things. I'm like, oh, Lord. Another one. I once it was pointed out to me, I found out how exhausting those events were, and how I thought counterproductive of the very message of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Second to last question. So and this is about like emotional labor and defining things for people in teaching. My father, Baptist preacher, obviously, you know, a great man in the great man sense, but also very homophobic, you know, in teaching these things to us as kids. And so his sister, my favorite aunt, obviously is a lesbian woman.
You say obvious? Was she obvious?
I'm saying obvious because she was so great. I'm telling you why she was so great. She was the like, if I stole something out of a store, I'm going to call her. I'm not going to call her. Because she understood the world in a different way. But the work that I had to do to unlearn and still unlearn phobia and transphobia and all of these things was very hard. And my question is, in your work, and even when you talk to people, how important or not important it is for you to teach while you are also creating, right? But also to do some of that emotional labor is also exhausting. I think about like the work that I do, talking about race, for instance, and have to correct folks when they talk about reverse racism, you know, or some made up term. But it's important also to build that knowledge level so folks can start to do the work themselves. So how important or not important is that work for you all? Emotional labor, defining things for folks, teaching in your work or not?
I have two conflicting responses to that. One is that I think that work is important, and I think that, you know, I get a lot out of, you know, like I just read Ijoma Olo's So You Want to Talk About Race, and that was a really important book to me. She's put a lot of effort into saying, okay, you're white, you want to talk about race, here's how to talk about it, right? That's extremely valuable to me, right? But then at the same time, like, I want to write a book for trans people, say, right? I want to write a book for trans women, about trans women, by trans women, that has a trans female gaze, that doesn't give a crap about any of that stuff, you know, that is just for us, that where we're not trying to teach anybody anything. It's like, if you want to come here, you gotta keep up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't kill you to do that work. So I think that there's two sides to that. Because on the one hand, you know, I don't mind if someone comes on my Twitter and asks me a question about being trans. Like, if I'm in a good mood, I'll happily answer them. Sometimes I'll just ignore them. But at the same time, like, I want to create in my work, I want to create things that are where you open it up and you see yourself and you feel comfortable in that world. You know, where it's like, oh, this is me, these are my people, these are my friends, this is the world that I experience and the way I see that world, you know? And I think there's a lot of value to that for people who aren't that, to say, well, I'm gonna make the effort to jump in here and try and understand what the hell's going on, and maybe I'll get something out of that. So I think it's maybe both.
Well, I'm always teaching people, because folks don't learn. They don't know any better, right? And besides teach them on race issues and queer issues, I'm also teaching them about disability. Able-bodied people don't realize how the things they do affect disabled people. For something simple as holding a door open, they just go about their business, right? Or you're inviting me to go somewhere and there's a step. I can't do steps. But that's the farthest thing that's from their mind, right? There was an issue last year, I don't know if any of y'all saw, but I was invited to do panels and there was no ramp for me. And it was steps that I had to go on. And I'm like, y'all invited me, but you know I'm disabled, you know I can't walk. So why is there no ramp for me to come up on the stage? Why wait till I get there? And then you're like, oh, I forgot. And now you wanna put the stairs, the chairs on the bottom instead of having it ready for me. Things like that I get pissed off about, because now I gotta teach you and tell you how you should look and be mindful of disabled people, right? Like, I can't sit and stand long. Maybe, I don't know, find a comfortable chair for me. Just do something, you know? Like, you have to be mindful. When you're doing panels, like, I hate when we're doing panels at New York Comic Con. There should be an interpreter there, because you don't know who in the audience is deaf or hard of hearing. But that's not on your mind. And people just need to just take a minute and just notice and pay attention, right? Because even though you see my disability, there are plenty of people who have invisible disabilities, right? And for fuck's sakes, pardon me, stop using the last stall that is the handicap stall. If you're not handicapped or you ain't changing your kid, stay out of there. Because I can't fit my walker and I can't fit my wheelchair in there. I gotta wait for you to get out. And what yours, you want room because it's roomier? Get your ass in a little stall and keep it moving. Like, it's things like that. So I'm teaching y'all about this and everything else. And it's I'm not your mule, you feel me? Like, I'm not your teacher. I'm not here to do nothing for you for free, period. Black women, I'm tired. Black women, we tired, okay? It's a tiring thing. But on the flip side, some folks, they either just don't want to learn and just don't care, and it's just tiring, right? I was hearing some dude ask me a question about, oh, how do you know? Let me check, make sure he's not in here before I say that. Okay, he's not here. Right? Okay, so, you know, I got this question as far as juke joint, like, why? You got people who live in New Orleans? I'm like, no. Well, how do you know so much about New Orleans? I'm like, research, business. Wow, you look like you somebody who would know. I can't believe you know all of this. I said, so how do the people know about space? That's right, these space books. You think they visited space? Like, why do I get a question like that? You're not gonna ask Phil that, but you feel comfortable enough to ask me that. Or why is my book female, what do you say? Is my book just for women? And I'm like, it's a book about respect. It just has women killing men. And I'm saying to myself, yeah, I think you would look, I'm gonna tear your ass up in my book for asking me that question. But it's like, you're not gonna ask him questions like that. So now I gotta sit up here and teach you, be like, no, this is a book for everybody. It's a book about respect. It's a book about this. It's a book about that. Think about shit. For one, I cannot stand that, but I'm always teaching somebody every day, whatever it's about. It's always about something in regards to me being black, queer, disabled. It's always something. And it's really, really tiring. I get every time I go out, I hate going outside because 9 times out of 10 somebody will ask, well, what happened to you? Why you walk with that? Do I know you? Is me telling you why I'm disabled, that gonna change your life in any way? If the answer is no, mind business. But people feel comfortable enough to just blurt stuff out, like we're best friends or something like that. Like, mind your business. Somebody's parking in a handicapped spot, don't chase them down and yell at them and leave. You know how many notes I done got on my car? You're not disabled. You can't park here. You don't know my life. Things like that is what. It's just a lot of teaching. It's a lot of teaching, and I try, when it comes to my books, I try to implement things as much as I can in my books to teach them. You know, in the new Bingo Love, they went to Planned Parenthood to get tested. You know, I want to help people, and you know, oh wow, if the grandmas can get tested, maybe I can get tested. I'm trying to teach. You know, so it's important, but it's also taxing. It's really tiring to constantly teach folks how to basically be a better person. Really promising.
Okay, if y'all need anything,
Sorry.
I think she hit on a little bit. It feels like there are a few layers to your question. One, of course, is because what you're talking about teaching, right, is about literally all these factors that make us who we are in ways that people who are not us would never be expected to explain about themselves. and like Tiff's saying, that can be really exhausting. I'm sure everyone in this room has had that thing where they are put in some awkward place where they have to explain something that the person asking that question would never be forced to ask themselves. Conversely, I come from it from a couple places. I have a great life because I've had great mentors and teachers, and I'm a teacher, and I'm super earnest, so I actually believe I'm one of those irritating people that thinks every opportunity is an opportunity to like educate and exchange, right? But mostly because I'm not answering as many questions as a lot of people. But I like it, because I find that you ask me a question, I will answer, and then I'll get a response, and I often say this, like I've said it on Twitter, I've said it in panels, there's 7 billion people on the planet, I think, each with like a different kind of brain that sees the world slightly differently, and so like I feel like every exchange is an opportunity to maybe learn one more way to see the world that I hadn't. I do find as I'm a little bit older, there are groups of people to which I'm cynical about transformation, especially through work. And as it comes to work, I know that I've been thinking about this a lot. Like I was thinking about the work that I've been doing right now on this Wonder Woman graphic novel, and how so much of it is so me. And again, like I think as an education tool, the author's bringing much more to it. Kelly Pseudoconic, it's definitely a sort of a feminist treatise, and it's amazing for that. I think its aesthetic is highly gay. Like I'm dragging those goddesses out like in the biggest way. And I love, and so I feel like you're not gonna be able to read that without getting an education, even if it's not entirely formal or focused. And I'm happy to do that. I don't think there's a work out there that I've done that doesn't have a queer sensibility because I made it, right? So that alone I think is I don't know if it's education, but it's out there in the other. But I do think must be, if you're not interested in teaching, it must be exhausting to constantly be forced every day to answer questions and to be like, okay, sit down class, right? Like, I like it. I see it as an opportunity, but for those who are not interested, it must be insanely tiring.
That's good. That's good. Last question before we open up to you all. I don't know if Richard is in here or not, but when I first came to Zeus Comics, it was on Lemon Avenue, and I walked into a comic book store. Obviously, I'm thinking about like a regular customer, how you're going to be treated. But I had just tore my Achilles, and I was on crutches, and so Richard, in his way, he said, "Do you have a great surgeon?" I have a surgeon. Like this happened to me. Let me tell you about this. And he's like, also, I do CrossFit. He said, after you finish, you can get in shape, you know. And so what that boiled down for me is, another person treating another person like a human. And I think that's the world we want, where we are not treated of, how we appear or how people perceive us, but how we are, and people are thinking about us and caring about us as human beings. It's kind of what I saw when I saw Bingo Love. It's like I saw this love story. It was dope, you know what I mean? And so I guess the last question is like, what do you all want to leave the reader with when you all are doing your work, and how also do you want the reader to treat your work as well? Particularly when you come up with these identities. I can imagine like I'm now thinking about reading this Wonder Woman graphic novel feel and thinking about these queer sensibilities within this great story, but also there's a story that started off with queer sensibilities. It's a queer story.
Sure.
I know that's a heavy question.
That's a big question.
That is a big question. I'm processing.
You told me to ask big questions.
I did, yeah, that was me.
No, these are great questions. You do these panels after a while, and you stumble on certain questions.
Yeah.
These were not those questions.
I guess how Bingo Love is just, love. Loving humans. Everybody, happily ever afters aren't just for straight people. And everyone is entitled to love. Everyone should have some kind of love. Whether it's when you're in your 80s or whether you're as young as 10 years old. Be open to all different types of love, right? Like you said, we all want to be treated as humans, and those humans are deserving of love all boils down to, you know, being accepted and being loved. And not a lot of people have love, whether it's from their parents, their mate, their kids, whatever, themselves. A lot of people don't even love themselves, and you know,
Can I
like
ask,
they,
why do you think that is? Well, the absence or lack of love comes from what?
things that happen in their lives. You
It's
know?
not. It's not larger. Are there larger forces at work that are stripping us or have stripped us? Do you think of the capacity to love each other, or even love ourselves?
I would say for me, with everything that's happened in my life, and you're constantly being told you're not shit, you know, nobody's gonna love you, you're stupid, you're this, you're that. You believe those things, and how can you love somebody who's dumb and stupid and nobody cares about you, and nothing but bad things constantly happen to you over and over and over again? It's like, why do I bother? How can I love
must deserve
myself?
this, right?
Exactly. These things happen to me for a reason, you know, and folks get to that point, they're like, why? I don't love myself, you know, and it's when you're in that place, that's not a good place to be when you don't love yourself and you don't care. You just do whatever because you feel like, well, this already happened to me. Well, if it happens again, oh well, you know, because you just get to that point that you don't care. And I just want people to start loving, you know, themselves and others around them even more. You know, I wish my grandparents were still here, you know, and that book is for, you know, it's my grandparents that I feel like maybe we should go and spend time with, you know, with the elders in our life. Since I've been in Texas since the 25th, and today's the 2nd, right? I think it's the 2nd, the 4th. Today's the 4th. I've had 3 aunts die since I've been in Texas. And everybody's in Jersey, and I'm stuck here, you know, and these are the elders in my life. And I wasn't able to say goodbye. I wasn't able to spend time with them. And these are people who I've placed in my book. These are little characters that are in my book, and now they're no longer, you know, they're no longer here. You know, we can't talk about these things, and it just, you know, obviously it really hurts that I'm loving Texas, but it's like, damn, I just wanna go home. You know, my mom just lost all these siblings back to back to back. And I know when we get older, we start to not really, you know, we start to not really care about our elders. You know, we see them every now and again, or we place them in a home because of, you know, whatever reason. And those people deserve love too, our elders, you know. And I just, you know, if you go and reach out to your grandma or something and talk to her or whoever, I mean, I don't know. I just want love. It sounds corny, but it's like, I just want love and peace. But for Juke Joint, I just want MFers to stop touching women that don't need to be touched. You know, like that is just like violence. Like, keep your hands to yourself. I'm going, shut up. It's all me. But yeah, just a lot of love and basically respect. Yeah, love and respect.
I think I want 2 outcomes, right? Like, I want in my work, like I have a book that's coming out next year that is about a young trans girl, you know, discovering her identity and coming to terms with it, right? And so I want that to be something that a kid can find in the library and go, oh damn, that's me, right? But I also want, and that's mainly what I care about, right? But what I also want is for other people to be able to read that book and to have them actually stop and think about a life that's different from theirs. And I think, you know, one of the most destructive forces in our quality, in our civilization is actually a really banal one. And it's this convenience factor of the fact that there's all these normative ideas. There's all these narratives about what the world is. They're like people like my dad, the way they see the world. You know, it's oriented towards straight, cisgender, white men, right? And there's convenience there, right? It's really handy because when you walk down the street, you know what everyone's all about because they're all about kind of the same thing. And so then when you see someone who looks different or someone who's got a walker, you're like, well, what's your deal, right? And so I think, like, ideally what I would want is for people to stop and think, and like, rather than see people as sort of non-entities that they can just throw into a category and keep going, it's like stop and actually think about, you know, like when I go to the grocery store, sometimes people will, this happens to me all the time, sometimes the checker will be ringing me up. I have this joke that I do where, you know, I'm at the HEB and I bought a lipstick, and as she's ringing me up, she goes, oh, honey, do you want to put this in your purse? And I say, yes, and thank you. And then she says, okay, sir, have a nice day. And I'm like, you know what? I came to this HEB to get my lipstick and my cat food and my family size bag of Doritos at midnight on a Tuesday, and you're making this sad for me. But the point is, she's not paying attention to me. She's not seeing me as a person, right? And so if we can stop and actually see individuals as individuals, maybe we won't make those snap decisions. Maybe we won't rely on our convenient ideas about who people are supposed to be. And then we can see people for what they actually are.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, do I have
Feels
to?
like I ain't
Yes, and yes. Yeah, the only, I don't even know how to follow up on that. I think that's, although, to my earlier point about sort of being excited about what makes us different, I think you just spoke out more clearly, I think, than I did. So, because, like, the idea that there's no default necessarily is really interesting to me, right? Like that every human being is just simply judged on the merits of who they are as opposed to what we bring to that sort of visual identity. I don't know if that's exactly what you're saying, but I think that's what I'm really interested in. That we navigate in a world, and I say we, other people, however you want to, like, where we are not the default. And then so we are, I asked, I bring this up because I asked some folks earlier, I asked this question a lot, particularly in diversity panels, about what makes something decidedly. And so I was at a strong female protagonist panel, and I asked the question, we know what makes a protagonist, we know what makes them strong, what makes them decidedly female. What was really interesting is that the people on the panel could not answer, but the audience came in waves, right? All these women were like, I'll tell you. But what was really interesting was so much of it was experiential, and so much of it was experienced in the way I find folks of color and other queer people navigate, because you navigate around this norm, right? And this might seem like bullshit to all of you, but it isn't true to me, that so many of us are raised, live our lives in reaction to how the sort of normative sees us, how they behave, right? Like, we're constantly working around them to not offend them, like to not bother them, to just be raised and not get beaten up or whatever, right? Like, so much of our brain energy is spent being othered and navigating that. And I'm sort of losing the thought, but that idea, all these women in this panel were constantly talking about, the very quick and easy example was being in a boardroom, lowering your voice, not seeing bitchy. We were talking today about uptalk and how if you answer, the theory behind uptalking is that if you answer a question with a question, it seems less confrontational. So women and gay guys are used to saying like, 2 + 2 is 4, right? Well, of course you're right, but like if you ask the question, it allows the normative person in the room to be like, yes, you are correct. Aren't you smart? Aren't you wise, right? In this sort of interesting, condescending way. So my point is, what I would love from our work and all of our work, I think, is to sort of start stripping away what is normative, right? As if, and like let every human being sort of be judged on their own merits. I think it's a really great idea. I myself am like, I'm ready for this project I'm on. Ideally would be my last, because I'm really looking forward to what the future holds for young people, because that's actually what I'm most excited about these days. Is God, every fucking panel, it's like cliche. But anyway, is what I'm looking forward to is this wave, this generation I'm in, getting out of the way and letting like the new one come in, take these things, futz at them, turn them into something, because I really think that we're in the way of a much bigger transformation towards that goal, which I idealize, which is that everyone is normative and nobody's normative, and that we're all judged.
Oh my God, these kids out there right now. I look at my 15-year-old daughter, the people that she hangs out with, they are not fucking around. Pardon my French. Like, they are serious about their intersectionality. They're serious about climate. They're
all that stuff.
Watch out.
Yes, they are a force to be reckoned with.
So
Seriously.
I'm looking forward to making sure they have forums to have voice.
Good. Good. Well, thank you all. Are there any questions? I know we have a few minutes. So any questions? Yes, sir. You.
Okay, I guess kind of getting back to the social media piece. Sometimes I feel kind of like a double-edged sword.
Oh yeah, social media is the devil.
I guess my question is, how do you deal with those people who always do that? Because when I see things like your book or Riri Williams, or when Sam Wilson was Captain America, there's like, people saying, this is just pandering. Why are you pandering? How do you deal with those kind of people?
You can't.
Listen, I got death threats and rape threats for Black queer grandmas. I was like, like, what are y'all rock? Like, emails would come in daily. I hope you die, bitch. I'm gonna kill you, bitch. All of this stuff. And I'm like, for grandmas? Don't read the grandmas. Like, what's the problem? And I just feel like those are the folks right in there. I hate to do the cliche, but I just feel like those are the fools that are in their mama's basement, not paying nothing, just on the internet, just trolling people. Those folks you have to you gotta mute them, you gotta block them, you gotta get them out your way, right? Because people are always gonna say things. They are always gonna say things to bring you down. And it's up to you to either let that get in your head, or you just act like they don't do it. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a lot. It's a lot. Tom King, he got this man knew ex-military duty, he got a death threat. What the hell, that boy could stay for your ass?
Ex-CIA.
Yeah, like what is you, like, I don't understand, like why do you feel the need to say you're going to hurt somebody because of a book? Don't read the shit. Don't mute the term bingo love or whatever. Like, just mute the term so it doesn't come up on your page. Like, I don't understand. Like, that's too much energy that you're putting out there. And I don't know, maybe you could find a place to live. I don't know, do something else. Clean the basement. Do something. But it's like, it's ridiculous. Like, and I know you were getting a lot as, what's her name? What's the colorist? Tamara, like there's so many of y'all who get all of this stuff, and it's like, if you don't like it, then just go away. You don't have to like them. They're not looking to be accepted by you. But you just want, hey, look at me, stupid bitch, I hate you, hope you die. And it's like, how old are you? Like, you're acting like a little kid. For what reason? I just don't understand it. But social media can be great, and social media is the devil at the same time. You just have to find that spot that's more so to the great side and just ignore stuff, because people will talk, it'll be lies, it'll be to fit their narrative, it'll be whatever, but you can't let that stuff get to you, because you need to focus on your craft, and if you don't and you just get swallowed up by them, then that's, it sucks, but that's on you because you fell in their trap.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
this is kind of long. There's going to be a setup to this. We did a podcast, and right after Black Panther came out, and my podcast mates, who at the time were all white, let me bring on a bunch of black people to talk about the importance of what Black Panther meant to us. And it wasn't until after I did that podcast that I realized, because growing up, I I'd go to a comic book, go to the spinner rack, there wasn't that many black characters. You know, I had my Luke Cage, or Power Man, and I had like Black Lightning and Falcon, but I never understood why I couldn't connect to those characters.
No black women.
Well, and no black women. But I guess
No, but did you not connect with black female characters? So
well, no, I know not just any of the black characters, and it wasn't until after I did that podcast that I realized that going back and looking at it, there wasn't black people writing those characters. And I understand now, after trying to help white folks understand race and stuff, and how frustrating it can be, that it comes to a point that you will never understand me as being a black person, because you will never have to deal with some of the things I have to deal with on a daily basis.
Exactly.
So can you write a black character if you never understand how it is to be black? So I guess, do you feel it's important to have a black person writing a black character or a gay person writing gay? Because even when they decided to turn North Star gay, you could tell it was kind of awkward because
I thought he was always gay.
He was always gay. He didn't
yeah,
start
well, always gay. But I mean, but you know, they came out and said, I still thought it was awkward, maybe because it wasn't.
They don't talk about it in the
wasn't-
normal
It
conversation.
wasn't a gay
No, it
person
was
writing,
because
so I don't know if they
screamed,
understood.
I am gay!
Right, yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
do.
Like, you know, like, I do. I would like to.
You understand what I'm saying?
One thing I do as a counter, which I think is really interesting. So, about 17 years ago, an academic named Stanford Carpenter invited me to be part of a huge study. Stanford's a black guy, and he was doing research on identity in comics, identity representation comics. If memory serves, I could be wrong. You should seek him out. One of the reasons he did this is because Luke Cage, who he thought this was an amazing. Oh no, excuse me, it was Black Lightning, who he loved Black Lightning growing up. Found him like this character to be like inherently political character, a confrontational character, like black with a capital B character, a real sort of idol for him.
Right.
He was shocked to discover that this character was written by and drawn by white men.
Right.
It really fucked with his sense of identity, right? Because he found strength in that character.
Right.
He connected with that character who was written by people who never had his experience. And so he started doing all this research, and he was one of the first academics who really started studying the relationship between identity and representation. And anyway, I just want to put that out as not a counter, but he would be someone. Stanford Carpenter would be really interesting to pull like into this conversation, because he's studied it and had, I think, a different reaction. Like there was a character that seemed exactly like he imagined a black person to be, only to discover it wasn't written by a black person.
I mean, you look at Luke Cage, right? For one, Sweet Christmas. Ain't no black person I know will fucking say Sweet Christmas.
Or
What
Booyah,
is that?
like we're
Like,
Cyborg. You know, it's just weird to me.
And I felt like when I was reading these books, I felt like they were just grabbing certain words, you know, that they felt that we would say, and just put it in there.
Right.
You know, like how do we use our slang, you know, the way that we talk,
Yeah.
you know, our vernacular, and it's like, it's not to say that white folks can't write black characters or
no,
you know, they can't write gay and trans characters.
Right.
There's always people around who can help you. You know, there's sensitivity readers that are out there so you can get the character correctly, so you're not making them look like a fool. You know, because if I'm reading something and like when I watch these TV shows and you have a character who's playing somebody in a wheelchair, but the bottom of their shoes is dirty. It's like, my guy, you're fucking walking. Like, if you're in a wheelchair, the bottom of your shoes would be clean. You know
That
what I'm saying?
nuance
Exactly.
it comes from being disabled, right?
Exactly.
Experience.
Exactly. So you can definitely, you can always reach out to somebody. If I want to write a trans character, I say, girl, look, I got this character, I need some help. Can you help? And if you do reach out to sensitivity readers, pay them, because this is their time. They're not your mule.
Right.
Don't do nothing for. I'm not gonna tell you I've done some shit for free, and I've been seeing these kids. I'm like, yo, I told you to do that. All right, whatever. But you know, you. This industry is, right? Sometimes I don't have a word. It's just, right? That is just my feeling in this industry, especially when it comes to folks who are writing different characters that are not them. They can do it. Some just do it and it's just
I think
all
I think it's
fucking
better
wrong.
these days. Like more recently, it's gotten better. But looking back on I can't get back into the 70s.
Oh
Like
God,
all of a
the
sudden,
70s that's
the 70s, the 80s. I just
literally.
And I was gonna say, conversely, what I'm really interested in are superhero companies trusting their big brands, and they've done it occasionally, but not often, to women and people of color. Like, it's not that I want to see like no white people writing black people.
yeah.
What I'm really interested in seeing is this whole variety of writers come in and be like, you handle Superman, you handle Batman, you handle Wonder Woman, you write Green Lantern.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing
Yeah.
Captain America.
Right,
never
right,
thought I'd
right.
see that.
Like a clear, like that's amazing. And like that's something I'm hoping to see. And I don't know if you all feel this way, but I feel like we were, and I'm trying to figure out what changed. It might have been 9/11, it might have been the rise of the internet, AOL, etc. But I look back at the fiction, particularly visual film and TV fiction in the 80s, which had an enormous amount of representation, not necessarily good, but certainly visual representation. And suddenly it got really partitioned. Like it started to lessen, and I'm trying to figure out historically what happened about 15, 16 years ago, where we were on a route, and then suddenly it got either niched or narrowed. I'm not really sure, but.
All right.
Wait.
Wait.
I have a quick thought about that. 'Cause I have kind of a rule of thumb that I go by, which is like, I feel like I will feel comfortable writing a black character if the story is not about blackness or a struggle that is unique to black culture, right? I feel a lot better writing that character if I have a black artist, a black editor, a sensitivity reader, who can backstop me, because I don't want to look like an idiot. And also, I don't want people to read this and go, well, that's not a black person, because then what have I wasted everyone's time. I wasted my time, I wasted their time, and created garbage.
It's like when they color, you know, when they get to the coloring process and they just making the character black. It's like there's no black features. You just made that person a certain skin tone. Like that's not a black person. You know, that's like the last thing from their mind. Like, where are our big noses? You know, we have noses, we have lips, we have certain features that are white folks don't have. And then if you're drawing a white person, you're saying that they're black and they look just like the guy standing next to them who's white. It's like, what? I'm not gonna be happy because you're doing a black character. And on the flip side, if you are doing these characters, you know, you're writing these books, don't do a book to profit off of my people's pain. Don't do that. You're not gonna sit up here and make these slave comic books and these slave books, because you're profiting off of my pain, of my ancestors' pain, and you know nothing about that. Don't do that, because those books social media will get on that ass and that book will be pulled. Like you can't, that's not.
Campbell, when he drew Riri Williams and sexualized the character in
I was
social
a
media.
part of that.
Yeah.
I got that pulled down. I got that cover pulled down. She was a teenager.
And to that point, he said he learned from that and drew another character and drew another cover, which was much better, obviously. But you know, that was that learning experience.
But so there's like the other side of that, which is that people will come to me and they'll go, like a lot of times people they don't want a sensitivity reader, like they want a shield, right? And so people come to me with their idea for a trans character, and it's about someone transitioning or something, and I'll just say, you can't do this. You cannot do this because it's not your story to tell, and you wouldn't have anything interesting to say about it. You wouldn't have anything new or interesting to say about it, so why would you even try to tell this story? Tell your own damn story.
Seriously, tell your own story. Because again, that's still profiting, they're profiting off of your pain, you know, of folks who are transitioning and the things that they've gone through, just so you can basically get a check. Tell your own story. There's so many things white folks can write about. Let me tell you, good job. The shit that y'all do. Y'all can write about that, you know, but it feels like they just wanna, I don't know. That's a whole nother panel. I mean, you can look at you know, these actors and actresses who are black or a person of color in a comic, but now it's being played by a white person.
There's like a running joke in social media that Scarlett Johansson is trying to play
Everybody, yes.
But on that note, I want us to give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you all for coming. So you want to tell us about the event that's happening?
Yes, that's what I want to do. Tonight we're having a live art show benefiting Lilah Sturges and some transitioning costs. So if everybody can come out, it's at Monica's Tex-Mex. It's at the Cedars. It's 4.3 miles away. It's super close. We're going to start at 8 o'clock. We have a bunch of artists coming in to create, and then they will be live auctioned right there. We also have some people that sent us things who couldn't be here. So I have a page from The Walking Dead, issue 166, Charlie Adler. Yes, Pencils and Eats. I have Sean Phillips. I have we have some signed books by Brian Michael Bendis. We have some signed books of Lumberjanes. We have stuff from Greg Rucka. Michael Lark will be there drawing. I hope maybe we have some friends coming, but if we can't,
I'll be there. Donnie Cates should be there.
Great, Donnie Cates
Megan
will be
Hutchinson, yeah.
Phil, you're down?
Oh yeah.
Yes. So you can talk a
I'm
little
just
bit
gonna
more.
get in a car and they're gonna take me somewhere.
That's how we do it.
And then I'll be like,
I was gonna say, oh, you're going.
But we
Then I'll be
have
like,
awesome things, and I can't wait to show everybody, and they'll be up. And then also there is really good food, and there's a bar, and it's going to be a patio just for us, a big area. And so, and you get to watch these people create things. It's one of the kind of things that you then get to take home. So it's amazing, and it all goes to Lilah, so it's perfect.
And if y'all want to stick figure by me, I got you.
that's a very good stick figure drawing.
Also, want to give Kelly